In today's episode, we talk about the creator of Apple, Steve Jobs. Coming up. In today's episode, you're going to feel empowered, unstoppable, and gain the tools to accomplish anything you can dream of, using real examples from some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. That's all happening today on the iCan Show. What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the iCan Show podcast, showcasing you the realm of possibilities and how you can succeed in your passion. My name is James Martin. Thank you once again for tuning in and listening to another episode. Today is so interesting because we're going to talk about one of the greatest entrepreneurs in the history of mankind, Steve Jobs. He's the creator of Apple, the creator and starter owner of Pixar, and just overall a really inspiring human being. And it's funny because I know this is getting kind of stereotypical. A lot of people, when they think about, the greatest minds and the greatest entrepreneurs, one of the first people that comes up is Steve Jobs. But it comes with reasons. When you look at his life story, you'll get what I'm saying. But first, before I get started, if this is your first time listening to this podcast, I would love to invite you to please comment below if there's something that pops up that inspires you. I want to hear your feedback. Let me know either in the comments or shoot me an email at matchcutmedia@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. All right. Steve Jobs. What about this guy? So, Steve was born in 1959 in San Francisco. He was fully known as Stephen Paul Jobs. As a boy, Jobs and his father worked on electronics in the family garage. Paul showed his son how to take apart and reconstruct electronics, a hobby that instilled confidence, tenacity, and mechanical powerness in young Jobs, according to a biography on Steve Jobs. Jobs was a prankster in elementary school due to absolute boredom, and his fourth grade teacher needed to bribe him to study. But by the time he was 10, Jobs was deeply involved in electronics and befriended many of the engineers who lived in the neighborhood. He had difficulty making friends with children his own age and was considered by his classmates as a loner. Eventually, he moved to the advanced fourth grade class where the teacher bribed him again into studying. This apparently inspired Steve's passion for learning. When he was 13 in 1968, Jobs was given a summer job by Bill Hewlett of Hewlett-Packard. After, Jobs cold called him to ask for parts of an electronic project. He didn't know me at all, but he ended up giving me some parts, and he got me a job that summer working at Hewlett-Packard on the line, assembling frequency counters. Well, assembling may be too strong. I was putting in screws. It didn't matter. I was in heaven. That's a quote from Steve Jobs. In 1972, he would attend Reed College in Portland, Oregon, which was an expensive school that his not-so-wealthy parents were paying for. Steve was more interested in taking a calligraphy course and later would drop out of college as to not waste his parents' money. Steve would sleep on the floor of his friends' dorm rooms, return Coke bottles for food money, and would get free meals from local temple. If Steve did not take the calligraphy course, the Mac would never have gotten the different fonts needed. Okay, now we get to the exciting part of the biography. Well, the entire thing's exciting, but this is where the legend comes out, because in 1976, when Jobs was just 21, he and Steve Wozniak started Apple Computer in the Jobs family garage. They funded their entrepreneurial venture by Jobs selling his Volkswagen Buzz and Wozniak selling his beloved scientific calculator. Jobs and Wozniak are credited with revolutionizing the computer industry with Apple by making machines smaller, cheaper, intuitive, and accessible to everyday consumers. The thing was, when they were creating computers, actually even forget the computers, even TV monitors and typewriters were very expensive. The typewriter machine keyboard computer by Humor Brew Computer Club used a TV monitor for $2,129 as a complete assembled kit. Wozniak conceived of a series of user-friendly personal computers, and with Jobs in charge of marketing, Apple initially marketing the computers for $666 each. The Apple I earned the corporation around $774,000. 3 years after the release of the Apple's second model, the Apple II, the company's sales increased by 700% to $139 million. The Apple II was the first computer to be mass produced. Now, you have to understand that when people think about the Apple computers, these were not the modern, great-looking, shiny, really cool Jetson-like computers that you see nowadays. Back in the day, these were beige, black, white, big hunk boxes. There was no mouse, just a keyboard attached to the computer, and it was basically this big metal box. They could do like simple coding and whatnot. It was not the most advanced thing, but it would become later on. When it comes to the tech industry, it's very easy to get surpassed and become obsolete. So Steve was under constant anxiety to keep ahead of competition, especially with their bigger competitor, IBM computers. Now, remember when we keep talking about having a good balance between work and family? Here's why. His longtime girlfriend, Chris-Anne Brennan, where their relationship was on and off for years, was pregnant with their child. At this point, Chris-Anne had left jobs, in which case he refused to give her money to pay for her living while being pregnant. Brennan gave birth to her baby, Lisa Brennan, on May 17, 1978. Steve was in public denial that he was the father of Lisa, despite working on a new computer called Lisa, which initially was named after his daughter, but he tried to cover that up by making it an acronym of Local Integrated Software Architecture. Jobs was worth over $1 million in 1978 when he was only 23 years old. This also grew to $250 million by the time he was 25, according to estimates. He was also considered one of the youngest people ever to make the Forbes list of the nation's richest people, and one of the only handful to have done it themselves without inherited wealth. However, even though he got used to huge success, later he would come to his big failure. At this point, the Apple Incorporated had grown and had a board of directors running the company. The board of directors told Jobs to get a CEO as he was not qualified for the position. In 1983, Jobs lured John Sculley away from Pepsi-Cola to serve as Apple's CEO, where he basically said to Sculley, "Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want a chance to change the world?" However, when Jobs would go to start Lisa, a business computer, the board told him no, as they felt that Jobs wasn't a good enough leader. So the Lisa project had been demolished, but then here would come the birth of the Macintosh. After the disappointment of the Lisa, he would start development on an idea for their next computer called the Macintosh, using the same technology as Lisa, but was available for consumers. Steve took his best engineers to an Apple facility to begin work. On a daily basis, he was consistently pushing his team to meet extremely high expectations, which caused a lot of the engineers to quit and remark that they would never work for Steve again. However, in early 1984, the computer at first was very exciting, but was very expensive and didn't get a lot of sales. The Macintosh was receiving huge buzz and excitement, but was not outdoing IBM's personal computer. Later on, Apple Incorporated was losing a lot of money, particularly from the Macintosh. It wasn't holding its own. In May 1985, Sculley decided to reorganize Apple and propose a plan to the board that would remove Steve Jobs from the Macintosh group and put him in charge of a new product development. This move would effectively render Jobs powerless within his own company. A few months later, in September 17, 1985, Jobs submitted a letter of resignation to the Apple board. 5 additional senior Apple employees also resigned and joined Jobs in his new venture, which would be called Next Computer. So after quitting his own company, Jobs took his team to create Next, N-E, capital X, capital T, a company that would not only revolutionize computers, but the environment itself in order to produce high-quality products. The company had to be perfect in every possible way. Next would produce a new computer that was perfect, but Jobs still had a hard time selling them. Next workstations were first released in 1990 and priced at just under $10,000. Like the Apple Lisa, the Next workstation was technologically advanced and designed for the education sector, but was largely dismissed as it was too expensive for educational institutions. After facing a difficult decision of either to ditch the computer or go bankrupt, Steve instead decided to focus more on the software than the hardware. The revised second generation, the Next Cube, was released in 1990. The Next Cube could share voice, image, graphics, and video in email for the very first time. Interpersonal computer is going to revolutionize human communications and group work, also said by Steve Jobs. Meanwhile, while the next cube was technologically advanced software, at Apple, the company was falling apart as lost its purpose and didn't know how to advance themselves. They were starting to miss having Steve Jobs. Now here's what is kind of funny. So while the next computers were starting to get a little more advanced, but that was where Steve Jobs was, Apple Incorporated decided to buy Next Computers in 1997 for $400 million. So basically, Steve Jobs' original company, Apple, would purchase his other company, Next, which made him just beyond rich. So I just think that's brilliant. Developing Pixar to infinity and beyond. In 1986, Jobs funded the spin-out of the graphics group, which would later be renamed Pixar, from Lucasfilm's computer graphics division for the price of $10 million. $5 million of which was given to the company as capital and $5 million of which was paid to Lucasfilm for technology rights. Steve would hire an animator called John Lasseter, who would later actually become the CEO of Pixar. So he hired the animator from Disney to work on computer-generated animations. They created small animated shorts, about 1 to 2 minutes, which showed potential in the animated stories. Their first short was the one with the light bulb interacting with a bouncy ball. The first film produced by Pixar with its Disney partnership was Toy Story, which was released in 1995, with Jobs credited as executive producer, which would be the first animated film in history. Toy Story would go on to make $350 million worldwide. Pixar would go on to create some of the most successful animated movies in the world, such as Cars, A Bug's Life, The Incredibles, and Monsters Incorporated. Now, after Apple Incorporated purchased Next Computers, Steve got back into working with Apple. It had been 10 years since he got fired, and the drama continued. At this point, Microsoft would develop the new Windows computer and became a massive success. Meanwhile, Apple was falling behind with keeping up. Windows computers would account for 80% of the market, according to a documentary of Steve Jobs, while Apple could not even break 11%. Bill Gates' Microsoft would end up investing $150 million to Apple to help them bring a line of new products. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs would become not just competitors, but really good friends, and mentioned that Apple didn't need to win over Microsoft. According to a quote by Steve Jobs, Apple had to remember what Apple was. Ken Segall would also work with Steve Jobs to launch a brand new campaign for their company that would define Apple today, and that campaign was called Think Different, which became huge and got a lot of buzz. So now at the Apple Incorporated, they needed to create a brand new product that would put Apple right back on the map. So they would start a new project called the iMac. One of the definite problems with the Apple's computer was their design looked very old and intimidating, and so their mission was to create something hip and looked like it was easy to use. The Jobs would work with an industrial designer, Jonathan Ive, to develop what would become the brand new iMac. The new iMac was released to the public in August 1998. It was a big, thick computer that actually had color, not brown or black, and it had see-through plastic so you could actually look inside, and was described as something you would see in the Jetsons. It became the new trending computer. Over 600 million iMacs were sold, and due to the success of the iMac, Apple made its comeback. After the success of the iMac, Apple Incorporated would start building other Apple products. In October 2001, Jobs announced a product that was even groundbreaking for Apple, which was the iPod. The new iPod wasn't just successful on its own, but brought in a new way for music to be listened to without being pirated. Apple would bring in top music executives to work out a new program called iTunes, which you could purchase and have people listen to the music without pirating. Jobs would also involve a policy with music studios that wanted to sell music on iTunes, which was that the songs could only be sold for 99 cents each. So, naturally, everyone obliged. Since 2001, over 250 million iPods were sold. Later, in the summer of 2001, Steve Jobs launched the Apple stores. Later, in May Later, on May 15th, 2001, Steve Jobs launched the new Apple Stores as a new concept to sell his products in a retail fashion. Over the holidays, the Apple Stores got 26 million visitors. And it's kind of cool because for those of you who've never probably walked into an Apple store in your entire life, maybe you've lived under a rock, what's really cool is it really looks like the most technically advanced store out there. What's funny though is it's not really technically advanced, but it definitely looks the part. It's got the products out there where you can see them on nice flashy desks. You've got the Apple Genius, you've got the Genius Bar, you've got everything that you can need, but it always just looked very advanced. Steve could get an audience super excited for the new products on their unveiling events called Macworld because of his showmanship. Steve was naturally good on stage. He often would be the one to introduce and announce his products. He was a naturally great storyteller and a great way of getting people really, really hyped up for what's about to come out. Later, Steve would announce a secret product that Apple was working on for years, and it was called the iPhone, which also became a huge success. And then in 2010, he would launch the product, the iPad. Unfortunately, due to many medical issues such as pancreatic cancer, liver transplant, and hormone imbalance, on October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs would pass away. Now, one time in an interview, Steve mentioned that making mistakes and failing in his days was actually considered very valuable because all you got was knowledge and experience. Rightly so, and that's why Steve Jobs has earned his title as a legend. All right, now I want to hear from you. Has there been something about Steve Jobs' biography that has inspired you to continue to do what you're doing? Please let me know either in the comments or shoot me an email at magicutmedia@gmail.com. I'd love to know your thoughts and your feedback. If you got any value out of this podcast, I would love to invite you to our online merchandise shop at shop.spreadshirt.ca/iCanShow. Here you can find many of our different shirts and different items so you can feel empowered and inspired. But when you purchase the merchandise, you're also supporting this podcast. This will allow us to not only create more episodes, but make them better and more fulfilling, and also help us when we get into 2019 so we can touch more entrepreneurs. If you're able to help us out, please share these podcasts with as many different people as you can. Tell everyone about this podcast because we really want to ignite the fire of passion in as many different entrepreneurs as possible. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, everyone. Have an amazing week.